and thank you very much for sparing your valuable time and joining this book launch come panel discussion session. And from all four of us, it's an absolute honor and pleasure that you'll have taken out your valuable time and you'll are joining for this innovative new way of a book launch session. And it is my honor and as well as a privilege to introduce you to my editor. Uh, Basically, there are two editors in this book, but it is always Indira ma'am who makes the initiatives and she takes the initiatives. And it is that driving force of hers that drives us all. We all four who will be coordinating this program, we are very well aware of it. So kudos and salute to Indira ma'am's zeal at this such a young age. And it's an absolute honor and pleasure to introduce Indira ma'am formally. So obviously, apart from having a very high potentials in academics, she has been a gold medalist in during her master days in Osmania University, and retired as a principal of Srimati S.R. Mehta Arts College, Ahmedabad, and has a teaching experience of more than 4 decades. And she's of course people who knows her know that she's a very versatile scholar and has to her credit a plethora of research papers published in various national and international journals of repute. And she's the associate editor of our creative venture called Gnosis, which is an international journal. We have been operating from October 2014. And her areas of interest includes translation studies, Indian writing in English, and modern British fiction and ELT. There are many other interesting things which I can tell about her and which I will tell during the as we move ahead with this program. So I hand over to Dr. Indira Nityanandam to move on with this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saikat. You have friends in the field in which you are. There's no problem of getting a big list of achievements. I think we all do our little bit. I have age on my side. I'm not going to tell you my age, but you can well guess it. I'm with much younger people, and I think that's my driving force. Welcome to all of you who have been able to join us today. Some of you are contributors to the volume that we are going to talk about. Some of you are translators. Some of you are friends and well-wishers. And some of you are just interested in the process of translation. And I think all of us together can take this forward in a multilingual country like ours. I keep thinking of translation as a bridge, to use an Indian word, as a setu, to bring us all together, because most of us read a lot of non-Indian literature translated into English and don't even think of it as translation. But when it comes to our own languages, if I think of Manipuri, for example, how many authors do I know? And why do I not know them? Only because I don't know the language. I'm taking a state which is far away from where I am, because I'm in the west of India. I'm in Ahmedabad. So I'm going right away to the northeast. Very quickly, let me tell you what we are planning to do today and how all this came about. On the 19th of March, on the 18th of March, and I think the dates are very clear in our mental calendar, I received a set of books. My copies as editor, the copies that Tara Chanji of Creative Books sent to me. That, my dear friends, was 18th or 19th of March. And I really need not tell you what happened after that. I asked for the addresses of our contributors. Saikat's bundle also came to me. And by then, everything had stopped. So it stayed with me for almost 3 months. And around the middle of June, or maybe towards the end of June, Tara Chanji of Creative Books told me that now he will be able to post it because the Postal Service, he has great faith in the Indian Postal Service. So he believes in sending it only by Indian Postal Service. So then he sent it, and I think all our contributors have got their copies, except for those of our contributors who live abroad, because the Postal Service to foreign countries, the US, for example, have not yet begun. Why am I telling you all this, my dear friends? Because the entire process of getting people to contribute, inviting people to contribute, their contributions come in, etc., etc. But Saikat is going to tell us much more about it. What are we going to do today? I'm going to speak for a few minutes about our book. And after that, we have two moderators today, Dr. Murnali Chatterjee and Dr. Ishmit Kaur. Both of them will be talking to some of our contributors. We are very happy that our contributors have been able to make it. One of the first who appeared in the group now today is Vidya. I'm very happy she could make it. And there are others also. So Dr. Murnali and Dr. Ishmit will be talking to them. In between these two, we will also have an opportunity to talk to Taratanji's daughter, who is also with Creative Books Publishing. Neha will also be talking to us about maybe the publishing industry in India today. And then Saikat will take it forward by telling you more about the process of bringing out this book. And that is when, my dear friends, we will be able to take your questions. I would request you to put your questions right away as and when they strike you in our chat box. Dr. Saikat, who is from Don Bosco University in Guwahati, Assam, will be taking forward. As you know, he is one of the editors of this book, Translation Studies, Approaches and Practice. He will take it forward and then we'll have some time for questions. I hope we'll be able to do all this within an hour as we have planned. Maybe one word from Saikat. If Zoom, after 40 minutes, Saikat, maybe you could just tell us that, what we would need to do, Saikat?
I think we will not have a problem.
We will not have a problem. Okay, okay, fine. So we will not have a problem, so that's okay. But in case we have a problem, technically, I think most of you use Zoom, so you know what actually happens. So let me tell you about this book. I consider myself a true Indian because I'm a Tamilian, but I was born in Bengal. I studied in Hyderabad and I work in Gujarat. So I already have 4 languages with which I'm associated, which I've learned, which I can read, write, speak, whatever. And then, of course, as educated Indians, most of us are comfortable with English, a little bit of Sanskrit because of my family background, and then, of course, Hindi. So when all these languages are there in my mind and I'm thinking and I'm reading and I'm listening, I constantly feel that we in academia, we should do something for the literatures of our country, at least of our country, of the world, yes, but of our country. And so I began by translating, and I translated something which was tough, but it was close to my heart, translating some poems of Subramanya Bharati, who died in 1921. But he was already writing of singing and dancing, Aduvo me, Paduvo me. We will sing and dance now that we have attained independence. He's writing this in 1921. So you can imagine the kind of visionary he must have been, or the dreams that he must have had. With Tamil as my mother tongue, though I never studied it at school, I began translating some of his poems. And in which language should I do it? I thought I should do it in the language of the state where I live. And I live in Gujarat now. So I began by translating it into Gujarati. And the kind of response I got, the grant that I got, etc., made me believe that I should do something more. And that's where my journey began. But just my translating is not enough. We also need to talk about the process of translation. And that is how this book came into my idea, into my head, into my mind. Saikat is probably half my age or even less. I'm not sure, Saikat. We do a lot of projects together. And so we began talking about, is this workable? We said, yes, it's workable. We have to take it ahead. And that's how this book began, the genesis of the book, if you please. We decided then that it's one thing to talk about translation, another thing to translate. So we wanted this book to have both. We also said translating is one thing, but talking about what happens when you translate is also important. So when you have, those of you who have not seen this volume, when you see it, you will realize that the translators have translated into English from some language. But they're also talking about the process of translation, what happens, what is translatable, what is not translatable, etc., etc. But all that will come across when we speak to our contributors here. Just a word about Ishmit and Murnali. They are friends. They are young friends of mine. We live in the same city. We live in the same state. Ishmit works in Gandhinagar, which you know is the capital of Gujarat. So does Murnali. But we've been in touch. Murnali is my daughter's age, so you can see the generation that separates us. And Ishmit is also close to her. Saikat is even younger. But why I'm saying all this is because once you are interested in academics, I don't think age is a factor at all. As has oft been repeated, age is just a number. Ishmit and Murnali, though they were not friends, I mean, in the sense that they really don't know each other very well, almost on the same day asked me, both of them are contributors to this volume, asked me, ma'am, aren't we doing something about a book launch? I mean, it's so strange what sort of telepathy they had. On the same day, both of them sent me a WhatsApp message without knowing each other, without knowing that the other was saying it, ma'am, what shall we do? So then Saikat and I put our heads together. 4 heads are better than 2. So 4 of us together, we planned this evening. It's the first time we are doing it. All of us have books to our credit. All of us have participated in book launches. But honestly, my dear friends, this is the first time we are doing what is called a virtual book launch, if you please. So we said just a book launch is no fun. Let's bring in something more. And that's how the idea of bringing in our contributors came onto the scene. I'm a teacher, as most of us here probably are. I can speak nonstop for at least 50 minutes, but we have only 1 hour. So I think, Saikat, I've said enough for the moment. If you give me an opportunity, I will take it forward. So what happens next? I would like to invite our young colleague, Dr. Murnali Chatterjee, who is assistant professor at Nirma University. Maybe some of you have heard of Nirma, some of you have not. Maybe some of you know only the soap Nirma, but Nirma University is a big educational hub in our state and probably in maybe known and recognized in many parts of the country too. So can I request Murnali to take it forward? Please, Murnali, it's all yours now.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the detailed introduction, and thank you us for putting us in such high esteem. We are always humbled by your efforts. We have a panel of esteemed contributors to discuss the process of translation. Our first panelist, Dr. Pranav Joshipura, is the Vice Principal and Associate Professor at UMA Arts College and Nathipa Commerce Mahila College, Gandhinagar. So my question to you is, what questions do the translation of the play Ryoka Light into Gujarati raise about race, culture, and society? Sir, if you could unmute yourself and speak.
Pranav, if you could give me a minute. Welcome, Reena. Reena, it's 5 o'clock where she lives, but she still joined us. Welcome, Reena. Welcome, Archie from Hyderabad. Thank you so much for joining us. Pranav, please.
Yeah. So many congratulations to the editors, Indira ma'am and Dr. Saikat, to all the contributors who have contributed to this magnificent volume. And it is not only, this is not limited only to English. There are translations from various languages to English and vice versa. My translation is a play from English, South African English to Gujarati. This is the anthology of the play in which Ryoka Light is published by Ashwin Singh, and this is what Gujarat Sahitya Akademi has published. The translated volume, Ryoka no Surya. So the thought occurred to me because this play covers 150 years of Indian existence in South Africa. It begins in 1860s and ends up after South Africa's freedom. Now, while translating the play, the first and obvious question which occurred to me is that the question of race does not exist in India. We know black, we know white, we know we are Indians, but we don't live race. We have castes. So how to significantly say, sensitize people about coexistence of races and interracial, intercultural milieu, and political and social contribution of race and the significance of race. For example, before 1994, from 1948 to 1994, there was apartheid. So the whites dominated, and all other non-whites were blacks. This is what Steve Biko called as Black Consciousness Movement. So we were considered as blacks. Of course, we were given some certain privileges better than the blacks. After 1994, we were branded, we were considered as Indians. And Indians opposed blacks in the elections. So this political shift, this social shift, this cultural shift is very significant. Now a black person buying a house in Indian neighborhood, an Indian buying a house in the former white area, all these are very significant. So what looks to be intercultural, multicultural, multiracial milieu presented through the plays is very difficult to explain to the people who have not experienced race at all. So it created a problem. A very minor example, but let me share an example with you. Like, black in Gujarati is Ashwet, white in Gujarati is Gora, Indian is Bhartiya, but how do we translate colored people? The fourth category is colored people. We may say Mishra Rangin, Mishra Rang, but that does not signify the meaning. Right? So these are, these are the issues which I encountered in the process of translation. Now, what was the way out? I wrote a detailed introduction about the situation of Indians in South Africa. Interestingly, in South Africa, Indian community had a very peculiar kind of relationships with black. Some of the Indians treated black in a very humane and a very considerate and a very kind, in a camaraderie, in a brother-like position. While many of the Indians, they humiliated blacks. So such was the relationship. In this play, there's a black character called Temba, Themba, Temba Dlamini. Now Temba Dlamini is thrown out of the job without any reason. He's just thrown out because he's charged for theft, and everyone knew, even the owner of the house knew he has not done any theft or anything, but he's thrown out of the job. Now this is very obvious in South Africa. Everyone understands the real reason, but how to explain this to a Gujarati audience, to the target audience, about such behavior of the Indians? Now all these created problems. And the last thing which I would like to point out is that even within the Indian community, till about a decade after the honeymoon period, say after the freedom, that is up to 2004, there was a difference between Hindi and Tamil kind of thing. It is reflected very well in this play. So within the Indian community, there were within one ethnic group, in terms of multiracial milieu, within the Indian community, there were divisions. Now all these things are beautifully conveyed through this play. Now to an audience, to the readers who are unknown to this reality. Now, we know South Africa through Mendel and Gandhi, nothing beyond that. We don't know that Mac Maharaj was the first or one of the first to learn the art of making bomb in Germany. And then he planned many sabotages, and then he trained many people. He was an Indian, and he became the transport minister. Very, very few people. We know about the contribution of Indians. We know about the blacks and the Indian relationship, but we don't know the layers of relationship with the blacks. We don't know the layers of relationship with the whites. It was not consistent. There were layers within the relationship. And the last thing which I would like to point out is that when whites dominated, it was the white world, nothing else. But when the blacks started ruling after 1994, and after Mandela fading out of the political scenario, that is post 1998, things started taking a turn. The, the race war was converted into the class war. Rich and white, rich and politically powerful white, rich and politically powerful Indians, rich and politically powerful blacks, they became an elite class, and all the rest. So now who is a white in South Africa? Those rich people, those elite people, those politically powerful people. Now who is black in South Africa? Those without all these. Now these things are reflected beautifully through this place, through this specific play, Rio Kalite. And it's difficult to convince the reader in Gujarati about these subtleties. These are the problems I encountered. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before moving on, I would like to welcome Dr. Subro, who has joined us. Subro, welcome to the panel. Subro is one of the contributors, and Manroop
Thank you,
Dhingraji,
Saikat.
thank you so much for joining. Yes, please.
Next panelist, Dr. Archi Madhani Patel, is the Vice Principal at Slate, the school in Hyderabad. Ma'am, your paper proposes the minimum required qualification for a possible translator is to be able to infer the linguistic and cultural variety of languages in translation. How does your paper justify this?
Good evening, everyone. So when I started writing this paper, basically we start by looking at how do we translate and what do we want to translate. So first of all, we start with linguistic translation because we look at word-to-word translation, and then can we put it into the grammatical translation or not, the subject, verb, object kind of thing. And from there on, it goes on to many kinds of things like, does it give you a translation of the culture, the specific culture of that particular language or not? So I looked at the Marathi text of Vijay Tendulkar's Sakharam binder, and I could not find the Hindi translation of it, unfortunately. But obviously we all have the English translation, and I've just read up both the books, and I found it really sometimes very surprising, also sometimes difficult, sometimes easier, that when you translate from the Indian language into the English language or any foreign language for that matter, it was a little difficult to translate or put the culture into that language. But if I could have found the Hindi translation as well, I'm sure it would have been slightly easier, because we all know there are many things that goes particularly in a language culture in certain languages. And then as Indians, we all know there are things which, we find the same kinds of proverbs or idioms, maybe in different words and different connotations, but they are there and they mean something similar. So finding that kind of equivalence was slightly easier than finding the cultural equivalence in a foreign language. So that's what I've been looking at into this paper, that the cultural translation of any text is to do with finding equivalence, not just at lexical level or syntax level. Because what we are doing, that culture, translating culture from one language or one text to the other language text, and that is the way of life, that is looking at the way of life. It is a perspective from one person's language to the other person's language, and that language always carries the culture that we have grown up in, the background that we all grow up with. So my language culture is different from your language culture or her language culture, always, individually also, and as a society also. So that is what I'm looking at into this paper, that how are we are the translators successful enough to translate a culture into the text from one language into the other? We might be able to translate linguistically or semantically. It can be a possibility. But is the translator successful enough to translate a culture into another? So if you look at some of, I have studied a few plays. I did not, unfortunately, study translation of other fiction, but plays I looked at, because for plays there was another issue also for translation, that a written play is different from when it is translated into a performance. So that again speaks a lot from when it is on paper and when it goes on a stage or in a performance. So that kind of translation is completely a different level of translation. But if we look at some of the plays of Vijay Tendulkar, for example, like Sakharam Binder or even Gashiram Kotwal for that matter, if you look at the original Marathi play, and then if you look at the English translation of it, it may lose some of its charm, that charm of the culture, the charm of the Ganesh Vandana or the Peshwas, and the way they are dancing, the Pune Brahmins are dancing in Gashiram Kotwal. We, as academicians, we might enjoy all that in any language, but we do not know that for the other readers, what are we trying, whatever we are trying to put forward to them, is it successfully reaching out to them or not? So as a translator, one always has to keep in mind that whatever the translation is taking place, it's not just word to word translation, but there is also a lot of culture from that society, from that language, which is going into the other language, into the other society. And that is how it works. So I feel language and culture are interdependent on each other. And when you start translating, we can never translate word to word or just linguistically, because you always translate it as a culture. So if I want to translate from Gujarati text to an English text, I need to know what that culture in that Gujarati text, what is the culture that it is coming with, and then I need to put it in English. So it is it is quite difficult, I would say. And so for that matter, the translator needs to be an expert with the cultures of those societies, of those languages. So each person perceives the world from their own culture, and that is how translation takes place. Yeah, Murnali.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Our next contributor is Dr. Ishmeet Chaudhary. She is an assistant professor at the Center for English Studies, Central University of Gujarat, Gandhinagar. Ishmeet, what were the most difficult challenges of translating Janine Lian's poems from English to Punjabi?
Thank you, Murnali. I would actually begin by congratulating the editor and um, contributors for bringing out such a wonderful, book, which is actually also a depiction of what we are. People belonging to certain states, speaking certain languages, different mother tongues, and then we all come together, staying in different states, acquiring those languages, living those languages, cultures, and this multiplicity that is within us is actually truly very beautiful, and that gets translated to uh, what when I did this translation of Janine Leon's, an Australian Aboriginal writer who had written her poems in English, and I took a very ambitious challenge of translating them into Punjabi. And I remember talking to one of my friends who happened to comment that, "Oh, are you mad? Like, who's going to publish this? I mean, Australian Aboriginal writer into Punjabi, and it's such a far-fetched connection, no cultural connect. I mean, what are you doing?" And I was like, no, I mean, that has to be brought in primarily because to me, there was a sense of resistance, there was a sense of asking questions, why? And it was questioning the binary of the black and white within the poems, but at the same time it was a cultural restoration of and for the Aboriginal uh, people. And I thought that their suffering was quite similar to the suffering which the Punjabis had there. At the same time, the life that the Aborigines had lived, is a very, very like raunchy life, or what we say is like full of energy and enthusiasm. And this was something which I also saw in the Punjabi culture. And the challenges that I faced were many. I began with an hypothesis that this translation is largely going to be a literal translation, and I may not be able to translate a lot of cultural nuances. The second hypothesis with which I began was also this, that Aboriginal cultures, the language has a certain tonality, and that tonality was definitely visible in English. And I was like that, I will not be able to retain that tonality. And the biggest challenge was, of course, translating some very, very cultural nuances of the Aboriginal cultures, which were completely different from the Punjabi culture. There's a list of those signs which I've mentioned in the paper, so I won't think about that here. But what I would like to emphasize on two things, my two hypotheses with which I began, that it's going to be a completely different translation, was tested completely negative because it did not remain a literal translation. It became a very, very closely, like a close cultural translation to Punjabi culture itself. Number two was tonality, and the moment we translated it from English to Punjabi, like I translated it from English to Punjabi, there was a retention of the tone. So the poems in Punjabi, were like restoring the tone, and perhaps because it was a regional language which had oral roots, and it could retain that orality of the Aboriginal language itself. And the poems became so melodious that one could even sing them. And that was to my surprise and also, to my pleasure, and I was really happy doing that. Challenges were immense. Far-fetched cultures did not know how to transpose, a lot of things together, particularly the science. But I think the outcome was beautiful, and I did get a publisher. I did get the book published, and it was a beautiful experience indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishmeet. That was a very helpful insight into translating. I too had received the privilege of making a humble contribution to this publication through my paper, Translating Across Cultures, through the example of translation for the famous Bengali poem called Shot Patro by Shukumar Rai, a humorist, into English. I have tried to demonstrate how, like poetry, even humor gets lost in translation. Like rhythm and rhyme, the significance of homonyms, homophones, and intended puns also get compromised. And that is how we lose a lot of meaning. But now I invite Ms. Neha Tanwar of Creative Books from New Delhi to speak about the publishing industry today.
Hello, good evening, everyone, once again. I'm Neha Tanwar. I'm representing my father, Mr. Tarachan Tanwar, who has done the publishing of this book with Indira ma'am. And the only thing that I want to tell the industry, you must have seen the way it has been changing and all. Our publishing house has been almost 3 decades old, and the prominent changes that came into this industry for almost last decade. Like everything has been digitalized, and everything is has become more convenient and more available to people around the world. They are not just confined to specific places. Like initially, you just need to contact to various librarians and distribute the books around. But now it has become more easier for people to just go around and look on various websites and gain information about the books, and also know about the book with all the descriptions and everything. So it's changing, and it has made everything very easy and convenient for people. When initially everyone used to need to have a one-on-one communication to advertise their books or tell people about their books. So I think it will keep evolving, and it is evolving, which is a very good part of it. But um, somewhere or the other, I think that old school charm of the books, which when you can have the hard copies and read them and have that feel of reading a book, that is losing. Like, people are losing it somewhere, which I think it's not that good for the readers, because readers actually you get that feel of reading a book once you have the hard copies in your hand. And similarly, to keep our things in pace with the times, so we have also started, advertising our books on various platforms such as Amazon and Flipkart. And so we have done the similar thing with this book also. So it's available to every one of you, and you can, very easily make it accessible to yourself, and you can purchase it from there, know about the book from there, and can read it. I think that's all I would have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I now invite Dr. Ishmeet Chaudhary to moderate a discussion on the first-hand experience of translating.
Thank you, Murnali. I think the second part of the book, which actually talks about...
Ishmeet, sorry to interrupt you. Can you just bring the wires of your headphone at the front side? You are not audible that much. Thank you. Yes.
No, Saikat, also maybe...
Is this better?
Yeah, it's better.
I use a device. Ishmeet,
Yeah.
if you have two devices on, please switch off one. I think there's
No, I just have one on.
Okay. There's a little echo.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes. Please carry on.
All right. Okay. So the second part of the book, which talks to us about the translating experience in itself, is a very beautiful basket, woven into English from different languages. And we have a translation of stories from Gujarati, from Tamil, from Punjabi, from Hindi, from Bengali, into English. And I'll just mention, all contributors who've done them, even if they are not with us today, they've not been able to join us. We've got Manoj Chhaya, who's translated Jayant Khatri's story Khichdi as breadwinner in this volume. Vidya Srinivasan has translated 3 short stories from Tamil by 2 different writers, by Dilip Kumar Ray and Vera Pandyan. I hope I'm pronouncing the names correct. She's with us, and we'll soon be talking to her. We've got Manroop with us also, who has translated Punjabi poem of Shiv Kumar Batalvi into English. Then we have Reena, who's also with us, who's translated Mohan Rakesh's Mawali into English. Our dear Professor Indira Nityanandam, she has translated folk songs from Tamil into English. And we've got contributions by Dr. Jaideep Sarangi, who has translated a short story of Jatin Bala and 5 poems of Manohar Murli Biswas, who are Dalit activists from West Bengal. I'll invite our first contributor, Vidya, and I'll put my first question to her. Vidya, how does one map the experience and cultural nuances, while negotiating the language transaction like translation of idioms, proverbs, and other culturally specific terms, while translating a short story? I must also mention that Divya Srinivasan is an assistant professor from Stella Maris College, Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. Divya, over to you.
Yeah, hi, Ms. Ishmeet. Just checking, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So regarding the translation or the mapping of the cultural interesting in the selection of 3 stories, because if you look at the stories, the authors are Dilip Kumar and Vera Pandyan. Dilip Kumar is a Gujarati by origin, and he is a writer in Tamil. And Vera Pandyan is Tamil by origin as well. So when we're looking at these stories that they've written, the cultural backdrop is actually pretty interesting, because we're talking about Dilip Kumar, who writes about the Gujarati community in Tamil Nadu, particularly in Chennai, his hometown. So we're looking at a very interesting perspective on the Gujarati community in Chennai. We're looking at how human they are, what their cultural practices are, what they value, how they adapt to life over here in Tamil Nadu. We're looking at a lot of very interesting, vignettes of the life as a community in Tamil Nadu. So to start off, I think it would be a translation in itself, because he's talking, well, he's giving us the impression of them speaking Gujarati, but it's written in Tamil. So the Tamil that Dilip Kumar uses is pretty objective. It's quite relatable actually to any lay reader of Tamil, and it can be pretty easily identified as part of literary fiction in Tamil. So that way, translating him in terms of translating the culture was not too much of a problem, because you can choose to adopt an English which is more or less regular, which is more or less literary. It's not difficult for anyone to relate to it. It's not particularly, the culture is not too particular that you have to bring out several aspects of it, that you have to try and capture its rhythm, because I think quite a few of us have already discussed how being 100% faithful is really not possible in translation. The most you're trying to do is to give the intended reader, the reader in English, some kind of a hint, if you're lucky, perhaps even more, a peek into the cultural aspect of this part of the world. But I think, having said that, with Dilip Kumar, it wasn't too difficult in terms of rendering it into an English that everybody, of course, is very familiar with. And of course, a lot of contemporary translators keep talking about how, especially in short fiction, in fiction for that matter, it's important to let the reader know that they are reading a translation, right? Now, in poetry, we wouldn't often, it would take a completely different dimension altogether, because you're talking about having to be spontaneous, you're talking about trying to translate the poetic experience into the target language. But with short stories, it's perfectly fine to take a license in that sense. You can afford to make your reader pretty conscious of the fact that they are reading something that has been translated. So you would have a lot of import of, non-lexical fillers, for example, like ayo or chi or things of that kind, which are typically part of our native tongues. So all of that would find expression in English. It would be directly transliterated, so to say. And of course, this works in, because translation is really more craft than art, especially translating short fiction. So you do have to negotiate how you make this clear to the reader in terms of introducing them to these non-lexical fillers. Sometimes when you're directly importing something from the source language, for example, party means grandmother. So the first time you're writing the word, you can choose to perhaps write it as a certain translator has in Tamil. Party, our grandmother told us this. So that time it is clear to the reader that this is, of course, you're going a step further. You're also explaining, you're not just translating, but that becomes necessary sometimes. And then the next time, perhaps you can choose to drop the my grandmother bit. So it'll just be party, but the reader would have become, used to it by now. The reader would be able to carry on with the translation, with the reading in a smoother way. And of course, when you're transliterating for the first time, certain words perhaps can be italicized. But for the second time onwards, it doesn't have to be the case, because that has become part of the literary landscape of the reader's imagination by now. So I think it's also pretty interesting how a foreign language in that sense becomes part of the reader's imagination, and that somehow enriches the process for them, I think, because it does, bring in a certain sense of mystery, I think, to the reading process by itself. And so with Dilip Kumar's short stories, there were quite a lot of, attempts, I would say, to try and bring the rhythm of the Tamil every now and then. And sometimes, of course, you really have to negotiate all of these things. For instance, there are phrases in Tamil which says, with reference to describing a certain character, he would go lotu lotu, tapping at pots all night. I mean, sorry, in the morning, and at night he would go loku loku, coughing. Now, all of these are, definitely part of very colloquial demotic Tamil. So when you translate these things, you do try to bring these aspects every now and then. You do try to color the world of your story with all of these aspects, which of course makes it really a lot of fun. And I think you also get to have your fair share of fun as a translator as well. So I think all of these things are at play while you're translating, even though it can be quite time consuming, it really is quite joyous. So all of this, it's happening by the side. And one of the I think you also have to kind of, at least for me, the case was I had to try and keep organization in mind, because it's possible to take liberties with all of these when you're translating the dialogues. But with the narration, it has to be more or less objective so that the reader can, be guided a little smoother into the whole process of reading something from a foreign language. But with the dialogue, you can definitely bring in more color and spice. So I think you can afford to take your liberties as far as that aspect of the story is concerned. Now, when we look at the story of Vera Pandyan, it's quite different in context from Dilip Kumar's stories, because we are looking at a writer who consciously tells the story of the more underprivileged sections of society, right? Because if Dilip Kumar's stories are focusing on the Gujarati diaspora in Tamil Nadu, on their cultural peculiarities, and if those stories offer you the vignettes of life from that community, what Veera Pandyan's stories do is to just present regular middle class, perhaps even lower middle class life to you without any uh, particular characterization in the regular sense, in the conventional sense of the term. He is looking at depicting the voices of characters who would not appear to be very interesting, who would not be very distinguished characters in the literary sense of the term. He is representing the underprivileged in that sense. So with his stories, there is much more focus on the rural, the particular locality, the particular accent of the Tamil that is spoken there. So his stories are set in the northern part of Tamil Nadu. So that accent is part of, the experience of understanding the story. So in that sense, it was much more difficult to try and communicate that accent, because that wants to be communicated. It is set in that particular dialect, and that is being foregrounded by the author. So in terms of translating that, it was far more challenging, I would say. So if you're trying to, bring across the cultural specificities of that story, it would be very, very local, right? Because you're talking about a very specific area. And so that was a completely different experience altogether. So in terms of how you would be translating that would be to, for a regular reader of Tamil, for someone who's used to reading short stories in Tamil magazines or Tamil anthologies or such, it would not be very difficult to relate to at all. These would be your characters next door, right? It would be very easy to relate to these characters. But for somebody who's perhaps not used to this particular cultural group, or for an international reader, you definitely have to, you hope for the larger part that they try and they are able to get it to a certain extent. I guess that's just how it worked for the story. So, because there are certain parts which are, for example, if you look at one of the instances in the story where there's this protagonist and she's traveling by bus, and it's a very hot day, and she keeps calculating the difference between, if she were to travel by a share auto, again, which is specific to the cultural group we're talking about as well. So if she were to travel by that, she would have to pay more for the fare, whereas, since she's traveling by bus, she can save that much money. So all of these concerns, the frustration of living a lower middle class life, all of these things very much inform the psyche of the characters that we're talking about. And there's this old man on the bus who recognizes her and who tells her to come have his seat, because she's a girl. She's technically a woman, but then for him, she's a girl and she's been standing for so much time. And so he tells her very informally to come take his seat, and she does so. And the author doesn't really tell us anything about her thanking him. The author chooses not to elaborate on that. So that would be part of the cultural convention that we're talking about. So I think experiences like these you hope that the reader would get them, but there's, I think it works as a kind of a balance between suggestion and putting something out there very clearly. So I think as far as translating short fiction goes, that would be what I have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it's very interesting to see one thing, like, because from Gujarat, if it's being done from Gujarati to Tamil, particularly the aspect of retaining certain words. So it's like, making the Tamil reader familiar with the Gujarati words, right, or Gujarati context. And then once it is done in Tamil and once it's again, translated into English, from Tamil to English, and then retention of both the Gujarati and the Tamil words is like making people familiar. And I think this kind of this is what is very beautiful about the, kind of country we are with multiple languages. And this negotiation, I think, is extremely valuable and very rich for all of us. And we should definitely, try and preserve it, or, we should try and maybe bring it more in interaction. Thank you, Divya. This was really nice. I invite Manroop Dhingra, who's the next contributor to the volume. And Manroop is an academician in Gujarat, from basically hailing from Punjab, but staying here for a very long period. Manroop has translated Shiv Kumar Batalvi, and Batalvi is a Taring poet in Punjabi. So I'm definitely sure that it would have been an extremely challenging as well as a lovely experience to do that. So Manroop, my question to you is that translating poetry is very sensitive, as poetry as a form has its own dynamics. So there is a rhythm, there is a tone, there is a rhyme scheme, which is available in the source language. So can you talk about the difficulties that you encountered, while translating from Punjabi into English, and particularly poetry?
Thank you so much for your question, Ishmeet. It is a very important and relevant question, as you mentioned, that translating poetry is a very challenging task. No matter how fluent or good you are in both the languages, it is challenging, quite challenging. The main problem that I faced was there were a few words in the poem which had no exact words in English. The words like dika and fakka pona, there are no words in English. It is not even close by, there are no words. So what I had to do was, I had to do a lot of research, and then I had to find out words which are like close approximation, resulting in a change of order of words from the original poem. And I guess this is a difficulty which all translators of literature face. And this problem is more prominent in translating poetry. Another thing that kept me redrafting my poem is Shiv Kumar Batalvi's lyrical aspect. In all of his poetry is full of rhyme, like you can sing it. They're basically made to sing. So in my translation, I tried to use as many rhyming words as possible, like wishing, flying, singing, forgetting, purifying, sitting, witnessing, and so on, to give it a rhythm just like Shiv's. I was singing the poem in my mind for many days, and even aloud a few times a day. I recited and then I re-recited the poem until it became my poem. As they say, translating a poem is a lot like writing a poem yourself. I had to think like Shiv, I had to feel like him, I had to feel his pain, his suffering, as he's called Birha Ka Sultan, king of suffering. He's known as king of suffering in Punjabi, in English, but in Punjabi it's called Birha Ka Sultan. Only then I could translate his poem. Also, one thing which I kept clear in my mind was that I should not deviate from the original meaning as intended by Shiv. These are the things which I kept in mind while translating the poem, Ishmeet. And with your permission, if I would like, if you allow me, I would like to sing. I would like to say, I want to read one paragraph from Shiv's original poem because it is so beautiful, so beautiful.
Absolutely.
Give me a minute. Give me a second. Yeah. The poem's name in Punjabi is Panchi Ho Jama. जी चाहे पंछी हो जावा, उड़दा जावा, गाउंदा जावा, अणछू शिखरा नू छू पावा, इस दुनिया दियां रावां भुल के फिर कदी वापस ना आवा, जी चाहे पंछी हो जावा. Thank you.
Beautiful. Those who know Punjabi, they will also realize that Shiv Kumar Batalvi is one of the most difficult poets, right?
Yeah.
And if we have watched this film Urta Punjab, so Ik Kudi Jida Na Mohabbat, that song is actually written by Shiv Kumar Batalvi, also one of my favorites as well. And I really congratulate you, Manroop, on doing this, much needed.
Thank you. If just one thing I want to tell everyone, that late Jagjit Singh ji has sung all his poetry in Punjabi. It's beautifully done by him, but it's in Punjabi.
Yeah. And I recommend Maini Mein Ek Shikra Yaar Banaya.
Yes, Chitras.
Yes.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Manroop. Our next contributor is Reena. Reena is she's a middle school English teacher, New Horizons School from Gujarat, India. And my question to Reena is that, Reena, can you please talk about the structural irregularities in translating from the source language to the targeted language? And it would be nice if you could also quote, something as an example from your translation.
Reena, Ishwit, can you give me a half a minute? Sure. Reena is not from Gujarat. I mean, she is from Gujarat and she's not from Gujarat.
Okay.
In the sense that she lives now in LA. So as I said at the beginning, a special word of thanks to Reena for waking up early, ensuring that the others in the house are not disturbed. Because Reena, is it what, 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock there now for you?
Right now it's 6.
It's 6. So thank you so much, Reena, for joining us. She's from Gujarat in the sense that our association began in Gujarat. But now she's been for almost 20 years now. She's lived in LA. Thank you, Reena. It's, the ball is in your court.
My pleasure. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank Indira for giving me this opportunity to even do this because it was such a gratifying experience translating Mohan Rakesh's story Mawali. I don't know how many of you know him, but he was a tall figure in Hindi fiction and drama. And he was also one of the pioneers of Nai Kahani literary movement of Hindi literature in the 1950s. So I know I have 5 minutes to speak, so just sticking to my time, translating here this story was more than rewriting the source content into a target language. And I thought as a translator, I needed to go beyond word-to-word translation. And I think I'm echoing most of my colleagues' words here because most of them have said that some of them felt they had the liberty or the flexibility to do certain things when they were translating. And sometimes we did not, it was a challenge. So I faced something similar. So it was, I would say translation here was a combination with localization and transcreation, I would say, because I was trying to stick to the intent, style, tone, and context because I thought that should not get lost in translation. So some of the challenges that I faced, the structural challenges that I faced, one of them was there were certain words with no correspondent in the target language, I would say. And I think Manroop wrote this already. She said that there were certain words when you couldn't just translate. So I would say one of the words was tafri. Now tafri, Mohan Rakesh, interestingly, he used even Urdu words, like very rich Urdu words in Hindi. So it was more challenging. Because tafri, instead of, he did not use the word ghumna, he did not use the word bhatakna, but he used it. So I was debating between wander or outing for Tafri. My choice of word was an approximation and not definitive, because I also felt that ambiguity of the words in source language was lost at times, because the word tafri could mean outing, aimless wandering, excursion, roam, and the ambiguity of the word that helped create a mental image in the mind of the reader was simply missing in the target language. So although I used the word outing, it lost its essence there. Similarly,
Reena,
yes.
you are not, we can't see you. Yeah, now I can see you. Something's happening, your image. So is your video having a problem or something? Now I can see. Yeah, so yeah, please go on.
Sorry,
We'd like to see you also. Go ahead.
There was another word, shamiana. Now, shamiana is a very common Hindi word, which is so rich, I would say, which is used. The moment you use the word shamiana, you think of weddings, you think of functions. So it was challenging to find an alternative expression. And I don't think I could capture the essence of the word or the color that it brought with the sound of that word. I could not capture it. There was another word, samla. Now, samla, yes, I thought you can say dusky, a complexion, but I still thought that it did not capture what I was trying to say. So all those were culturally loaded words, which was difficult for me to translate. Another area which I found challenging was humor or sarcasm, and I think one of the speakers mentioned that. Explaining humor was very challenging because it always depends on the cultural background of a person. Now think about the famous British humor, right? And how even other English-speaking populations rarely have a taste for it. Now imagine how hard it is to overcome language barriers and still be funny. So one of the phrases that was used here was "Badi tez aankh hai teri," or "Kis tarah chimgadad ki tarah lapka tha." You know, there's no way I can translate this whole chimgadad imagery there, or "Badi tez." Yes, I said you had sharp eyes, but no, it still doesn't capture that essence. But the person was very sarcastic when they were using this "Badi tez hai aankh hai teri," because you know when somebody says that "Badi tez hai aankh hai teri," there's a mixture of so many things going on there, not just plain humor, there's sarcasm, you are judging the person in that tone, right? So all that was also, I thought, was lost there. I mean, I tried my best, but I could not. There was sarcasm there, there was exaggeration there, which was lost. Another area which I found challenging was to translate figure of speech, onomatopoeia, right? How do you do that? I mean, there was a sound like now how am I going to translate that in this language? Or even there were certain sounds there which were so typical of I would say Indian culture that it was just impossible for me to do that. Or translating an idiom like ye muh or masoor ki dal. Now imagine, now masoor ki dal, yes, I understand because it was supposed to be something very expensive for a person who was in those days. And if I say something like, oh, you're asking for more than you're worth, it's stating very simply the rich meaning of ye muh or masoor ki dal. So I found that area also challenging, I would say. If you're, or vice versa, I would say if you're saying it was raining cats and dogs, yes, musladhar barish ho rahi thi, but raining cats and dogs, I mean, it probably it captured the essence, but not necessarily the way it was structured. So I would say my goal in this passage was to maintain the informal conversational tone of Hindi, which I would say nevertheless conveys in its stark nakedness the blatant reality that a free India faced after attaining independence from British rule, because the backdrop is that. And Mawali is a depiction of vagabonds and destitute children and raises questions about society's attitude and treatment of them. So in order to reproduce the original style of Mohan Rakesh, I tried to keep two things in mind. One, that I was working on a literary work written by someone else, and that I had to turn this translation into a work of art which is in conformity with the thought, feeling, and style of the original. And second, the linguistic point of view all the paragraphs, sentences, and words had to be attentively studied so that the best expression may be chosen to satisfy the needs of reproducing the thought, feelings, and style of the original. So therefore, even if some individual sentences or words were not satisfactorily rendered, they did not affect the style of the work as a whole. So I kept that in mind, that I could retain his style. And because the cultural setting and references were unique to India, so that's why it was also challenging to translate in English. And it felt at times that the untranslatability of cultural terms and references, like I mentioned before, they got lost. However, the positive aspect was that Hindi and English both belong to same Indo-European English family. That made the translation enjoyable and possible. So thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Reena. I mean, I totally understand, we've got a word, ladakna, I guess in Gujarati, avara gardi karna, ladakna, it's like tafri. But, and it does talk about, our habits that we have. So, I mean, while you were speaking, I was thinking about another word, gedi, so I mean, cultures do offer some of these simultaneous words, but of course it's difficult to find them in the foreign cultures, and and there's so many of them, there's so many, and idioms definitely, they're so culturally rooted that it's amazingly it's a challenging job. It's very difficult to translate idioms. Sometimes we do have similar idioms in foreign cultures, but many a times, they go completely missing. But I think a wonderful job done, and thank you so much. I now would invite Dr. Saikat Banerjee, who is an assistant professor of English in the Department of English, School of Humanities and Social Sciences, Assam Don Bosco University, Guwahati, Assam. He is editor-in-chief of 2 international journals, Gnosis, an international journal of English language and literature, and Darth Voyage. And he has, to his credit, 5 edited books. He is widely published in reputed international journals, and he's also the editor of this book. Over to you, Saikat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ishmi. Now, I'd just like to share with you all the journey of this book. I'd just like to take you all through the journey of this book, which is very important for all of us, because I'm sure most of us here are authors, and some of us here are budding authors. So I'd just like to share the process of developing a book, developing an anthology, and how to go about it. And I was very fortunate that I had the guidance of a very able leader, because I make it very, I always keep it very straight and clear that I am always with leaders, not with bosses. So I had the opportunity and the honor to have Dr. Indira Nityanandam as the leader of this particular project. And she has been the impetus behind this project. But whatever little bit of contribution I have had in this project, I would just like to share with you, because this is something which is very close to me. I have had 4 books, but this is something which is very important in the sense that when we develop this idea, this is a book now I think of 254 pages overall. I think everybody should see this book now. This is the book. It's available now. I think it's available on Amazon. It will be available on Amazon very soon. So this is a book of 254 pages, but there's a story to this book, a long story. I will cut it short. We started the conception idea of this book long back in March 2018. And that time I have already gone to abroad. I was working in Bangkok, and I started my work there as a teacher in a college. And myself and Indira ma'am, she has been guiding me for the last 10 years. And we were discussing about this book, and then we reached to a particular point, and then we floated the call for papers. Now, the interesting part is because I am associated with two international journals, I am very habituated with the academia, especially the Indian academy, and I'm very critical about it. I please don't be offended. But generally, we academicians forget to read the submission guidelines, and we spend a lot of time on preparing the submission guidelines. So the first problem that we encounter as an editor is we have a dilemma. And I'm very strong on one part that as a researcher, if you're not paying attention to the submission guidelines, I will not consider your submission. Whereas our motherly figure, Dr. Indira Nityanandam, is very considerate about the content. So we have our, debates and discussions, and we had these discussions, and she had given me the full freedom of working this MLA 8th edition style. And you know that UGC's norm in our English is MLA 8th edition that we have to have, and less than 10% of plagiarism, including your work cited. That is as per UGC 2018 notification. And we follow the same for our journals, we follow the same for our books. So there starts the first problem of submission guidelines. We have good papers, we received good papers, and we received a lot of papers. But unfortunately, when we receive the submission guidelines, we tell them to go through it. I don't know what is the issue. But when again we get back after suppose a month and a half, 50% of the contributors who we had asked to submit once again did not follow the submission guidelines again, somewhere or the other. And there is a very minute difference between MLA 7th edition and MLA 8th edition, which we all academicians must know before we write a paper also. That is my opinion. Of course, our motherly figure has her own opinions, and we obviously, whenever she guides, whenever she emphasizes on something, I try to learn from her, because she can be one of the best teachers from whom you can learn. So I have learned a lot of things from her, especially how to deal with such situations. Then after those things are done, after we spent I don't know, countless hours on working on the submission guidelines. I told you we had some opinions. My was different, ma'am's was different, and then we reached to a particular point and we started working. After that, when we were ready with the submission, when we were ready with the book, for example, the next biggest difficulty is to find a publisher in India, and I'm very sorry to say there are certain things in our Indian publication that has cropped in the last 10 years. Publication in India is very easy. Publication is just a child's play. You click a thing and it will get published. But the matter and the process of publication, it depends on individuals. And Indira ma'am and I was very clear on our publication procedure. We wanted a publisher who would appreciate our work and do the minimum justification that is required for the work. That is, justify our work in the form of a proper book shape. As you can see, it's a beautiful cover page with a very beautiful bound. For me, because I'm running two journals. One is the hard copy. I pay very clear attention to the pages also, the quality of the pages, whether this book will survive for the next 10 years or not. Because ultimately, as Ms. Tower has said of creative books, that having a hard copy has a different, in mind, in hand, having a hard copy has a different kind of pleasure. I also belong to that same school of thought. So my hard copy should be of very good quality, apart from the content. Both should be good, content as well as the quality. That is one thing. Second is when you approach a publisher, there are a lot of difficulties you face. And generally, we compromise on the difficulties. We Indians are very smart, and because academia, we are very, very smart. No matter what problems we face, we don't share with other people. For that, the third person takes the advantage. I'm talking about the publishers. Most of us in the Indian publication industry, I can give you the data, more than 85 to 90% of the Indian reputed publishers, they charge money for publication. They charge a huge money for publication. And we were very clear that we will not do that, because how can you pay for your work? The first thing. Second thing that we were very clear about is each and every contributor of the book is an equal proprietor of this book. So getting a copy, a complimentary copy, is also a must for the contributor. This is point number 2. And point number 3 is timely publication. These were 3 aspects, and that was the difficult part. But Tarachandji was very kind enough. Tarachandji, Creative Books is a name. I have read many creative books, creative publication books during my, especially my MPhil and PhD days. And you might have also read about creative publication books. Their content, no doubt, is very good. And they follow a systematic process. And that is what they have done with this particular book. This book was published this book was immediately done, and then we took time, especially I was the culprit. I took time in editing this book again, because again we had a first draft and a second draft. A lot of sleepless nights went in. You know how editing is. It is very difficult. I feel writing something is easy and editing is very difficult, because the more people see, the more people find out mistakes. So yes, then we did this and we sent it, and whatever delay was there was mainly from our part, mainly on my part, because I took a lot of time on editing. I am little naggy about editing. I try to cross-question myself. Once I check, I again check, because I feel that there might be mistakes. These are all experiences that I have garnered over the time through editing Gnosis, our print international journal. And then ultimately this got released in March, and ma'am felt very sorry because the lockdown happened, and my copies were also lying, I think, on her desk, dining desk or something. And she told me, she dropped a message once that, I feel so sorry. The books are looking at me and asking when I'll get the opportunity to meet Saikat or something like that. She had messaged, and I said that if it's with you, it's with me, it's not an issue. She said, no, getting a book on hand. I said, fine, you have seen it, you are happy, I am happy. And then I think with the passage of time, as the postal services were resumed in India, Tarachandji was very sincere to post this individual books to individual contributors' copies. And I hope the contributors are happy with the output that has come in the form, in the form of this book. And a lot of effort we have put in this book. And I'm sure if there are any minor mistakes, kindly let us know, so that the new edition we can remove those mistakes and make this book an enriching experience. That was it, and it's always a pleasure and an honor, and at the same time a positive pressure working with Dr. Igran.
Questions, please, from the chat
Yes.
box. Can you?
I had asked for some questions, and there are, I think, few questions that I can address to. The first question is to Ishmeet from Lalit Kumar Pahi. The question is, can we have an example of translation of English poem into Punjabi?
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. I'll read out, one of the stanzas which is there in the book too. So I'll read out first in English, and then I'll read out in Punjabi, so that you can have the taste of what exactly was the outcome of it. The English goes. Yes,
he wants it from English to Punjabi, not from Punjabi to English.
Punjab.
No, that is what I'm doing.
He is a teacher of Punjabi at Gujarat Vidyapith. So his interest is translating from English to Punjabi.
Yeah, I'll be reading that. I'm reading the same, ma'am, from English to Punjabi. First, I'll read the English stanza in original, the source language, and then what I did with it. So the English poem is called From Black to White, and the stanza is: white was full of color. World was full of color, red of blood, of earth, of bird, blue of water, of sky, of flower, brown of ochre, of grass, of animal, black of skin, of people of life, yellow of sun, of sand, of wattle, white of surf, of tree, of moon, green of hill, of plain, of wave, orange of summer, of sunset, grey of fish, of cloud, of rain, purple of spring, of morning, of haze. And what I did with this was संसार रंगा नाल भरपूर सी लाल खून दा धरती दा चिड़ी दा नीला पानी दा अंबर दा फुल दा बदामी भरावां दा घाह दा जीवां दा जानवरां दा काला ਜਿਉਂਦੇ ਜਾਗਦੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੀ ਚਮੜੀ ਦਾ ਪੀਲਾ ਸੂਰਜ ਦਾ ਰੇਤ ਦਾ ਵਾਟਲ ਦਾ ਚਿੱਟਾ ਤਰੰਗ ਦਾ ਲਹਿਰ ਦਾ ਨਾਰੰਗੀ ਬਸੰਤ ਦਾ ਡੁੱਬਦੇ ਸੂਰਜ ਦਾ ਸਲੇਟੀ ਨੀਂਦ ਦਾ ਬੱਦਲ ਦਾ ਮੀਂਹ ਦਾ ਜਾਮਨੀ ਬਸੰਤ ਦਾ ਸਵੇਰ ਦੇ ਸੋਮੇ ਦਾ ਗੁਬਾਰ ਦਾ. That's it. And we've retained wattle here because I did not want to replace it with any other bird which is available.
Excuse me, madam, it was simple words that we have exact meaning in Punjabi. You have selected that poem.
No, sir. The poems are actually quite simple in that sense, but there are lots of cultural particularities because I did not know how to translate wattle. You know, wattle is a bird which is only in Australia. Then there is kangaroo. I don't have a translation for kangaroo. I mean, these are physical, animals or birds, fauna or flora. More than that, there were many others. So I don't have my translated book right in my hand. Otherwise, I could have shared some complicated ones also with you. This is what I did in the paper. Yeah.
Punjabi to English, I think it is easy, and English to Punjabi is difficult. There are so many words in Punjabi.
It's very difficult. I have not ventured again to translate from English to Punjabi after this experience.
That is difficult, too difficult. Okay, thank you, madam. Thank you.
Mr. Syamal Rao Mabudru has a question. The question is, this is open. This question is open. So anybody of us can answer. The focus is on translating from mainstream languages, that is Tamil, Gujarati, Punjabi, Bengali, etc. We have translators who work on translating various Indian tribal languages. Can some light be thrown by the participants on what goes into these efforts as well?
Sir, Saikat, can I answer?
Yeah, you can answer and I will add something.
Okay, so would you like to begin?
No, please, you first.
Okay. The point is, I think when we look at translation, we're not very sure, I think most of us, where should our strength lie? By strength, I mean, am I good at the source language or the target language? Which is more important? So when we move to the tribal languages, I think directly into English almost becomes an impossibility. So like Plato talked about twice removed from reality, I think that's what happens most of the time. That is from the tribal language. So if I'm looking at Gamit, which is one of the tribal languages of Gujarat, I think somebody would need to probably translate it into Gujarati. So Gamit Gujarati is step one. And I, who know Gujarati and English, will probably take it from Gujarati to English. So I think that's the problem that arises. And to be honest, for this book, there was nobody who was translating from the tribal languages. But maybe if we do another book on translation, we'll keep this in mind. We do have people like Ganesh Devi in Gujarat who are doing a lot of work with tribal languages. I don't know if that answers your question, but Saikat will take over.
Yeah, I just want to add, because in the Gnosis lecture series, we had a tremendous presentation of a tribal writer by one of the presenters, speakers, and her name is Jacinta Kerketta. Jacinta Kerketta is a very powerful, you can compare her to Adichie of African literature. She's a very powerful writer from Jharkhand. And the best thing of Jacinta Kerketta is she's a convent educated girl who stays with the tribals and in their tribes. So what she does is she, as ma'am said, that the tribal language first has to be, as she gave an example, in Gujarati it has to be written, and then, you know, same thing what she does is, she does not use the local Jharkhandi tribal language. She uses it to portray the pain, the exact first-hand experience in Hindi. And at the same time, she also writes the same poem in English. You can follow Jacinta Karkata. She is very easily available on Facebook. And please go through her writing. She's a very, very powerful, young, I think 34, 35 years old, tremendous, celebrated tribal writer from East India, that is from Jharkhand. That's an addition that I wanted to make.
Yeah, can I also add something? Um, you know, ma'am mentioned about Gamit. So very close to Gamit is the Kundi Tribe. And at our university, Central University of Gujarat, there is a lot of work going on where the tribal students themselves are collecting their languages. They are collecting their songs, they are collecting their folklore, they're collecting their dances, and they're reproducing them. So, as ma'am offered, you know, hinted towards the dialect being written into the script. My own student, his name is Hemant Patel, who belongs to Kundi Tribe, has collected more than 100 songs. And his MPhil is complete. It has been digitized. It is available. And so the first problem that we faced was that, you know, these were in a dialect, and what language should he write? Interestingly, the research scholar knew both Gujarati and Marathi, and the dialect was at the borderline of Marathi and Gujarati. So we realized that the sound pattern was more closer to Gujarati. So we chose to write them, you know, transcribe them in Gujarati, and then later on we translated them. Interestingly, the major challenge that we all faced was that there were words in the dialect which were sounds which were completely lost the moment they were transcribed. So we wanted to retain them, we tried doing them, but still it can be recorded, it cannot be transcribed, or it cannot be noted down. So that was one. The other problem was so many words are already lost. People who are singing these songs, even they do not know the meanings of many of those words. So we had to just retain them as they were without meaning, you know, so we had to give a footnote every time we were doing that. But anybody who's interested, I would suggest, please refer to this thesis. You know, it is a MPhil thesis, but it is voluminous, and it is even better than maybe a PhD thesis, and it will soon be published, you know, in a couple of years. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. I
Can I
think,
just add?
yes, please.
Sorry
Please,
to interrupt in between, but I know a few people. One of them was working on Kachi Marashia. I mean, there are nomadic tribe who keep on moving from place to place, and they do not go to the same place again in the same year. So they sing songs. It is only the oral tradition. Now, this is very important in a tribal literature or culture, that most of the things that exist in oral culture, they pass on from one generation to the another generation. For instance, in Polo Forest near Ida in North Gujarat, there is a Kathod tribe, which is one of the protected tribes of India. They also have specific songs related to specific incidents like marriage and celebration and childbirth and so many things. All these are available only in terms of oral culture. So as Dr. Ishmit pointed out, to put it into words would be very difficult, because it is not only dialect, but it's a sub language. At times it is only words without any meaning, only expressions. Number one. Number two, I know someone in the border of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh and Maharashtra, who himself is a tribal, and he knows English very well. He also sings all these songs. Songs belong to his tribe. Now, his specific people have come out of the tribal area. Now they are educated, meaning they have left behind their culture. And the songs and the tradition are almost on the verge of extinction. Now, they know the song, but they don't know the meaning. It's as Dr. Ishmit pointed out. Now, Dr. Devi is doing wonderful work in this area, trying to preserve the songs by recording them. So it's very important if someone comes up and explains us what these are. And they are not only language, they are culture. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir, for your very insightful remarks. And I would also request you all, the participants and as well as the panelists, that if you get an opportunity, please visit the Facebook page of Jacinta Karketa. She is unique in herself. And she is one of those few writers, I feel, that who, in spite of convent educated, in spite of pursuing her postdoc and her degrees in Germany and Europe and all, she puts up with the Adivasis of Jharkhand. And I happen to get exposed to her writings during this Gnosis lecture series. And she happens to be a writer very close, around only 50 kilometers from my native place. So please have a look at her Facebook page. The pictures that she puts on with her poem, she's very unique. She will put a picture of that particular place and then she will write a poem. So it is very, you can connect with her poems and her writings. And she is very, very revolutionary in her writings.
Saikat, I want to say a word, half a word in between. Since we're talking about tribal languages, I think another thing which a person like Ganesh Devi, who Pranav just mentioned, is doing is to look at languages which are dying. You know, there are so many languages in our country where 5 people or 6 people now speak the language. Once they are dead, you know, because their children, as we just mentioned, have probably moved on to cities and have become educated again in that sense. But the language is dying. So that's another very interesting thing. For the person who asked us questions about tribal languages, what are we going to do? I mean, like the dinosaurs, you know, they're going to be extinct. Our language is going to be extinct. So I think it's very interesting. Those of us who are teachers of language, who are interested in these processes, maybe there's something else we need to look at. Yes, Saikat, sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, ma'am. And it was an absolute pleasure to have all of you today. And I guess now we can very safely say that this has been a very successful program, one of its kind. And the credit goes to all the participants, first of all, and the moderator and the program organizer, mainly Dr. Indira, Nityanandam, Dr. Ishmeet and Murnali. They have really put in their ideas and made this program successful, which of course became successful because of the participants participating so actively and giving their valuable participants. I mean the contributors as well as the participants, other participants as well, who participated so actively and gave their very insightful inputs. And so Indira ma'am, I think we can have this like this one of its kind when our next book on Amitabh Ghosh materializes. We are just in the infancy stage, and of course Ishmit is with some ideas. Please share with us with your new programs. Ishmit is doing something on partition for a long time. She has been writing with partition, and I have a close association with partition because of my MPhil dissertation and my work on partition. So definitely we have a group of Telegram group of Gnosis. I have shared the link in the chat box. You can join the group. The main purpose of the group is 3-4 main purposes: to connect to people organizing such programs so that we have more participation and active participation. Secondly, to inform all of us about the FDPs and the conferences. Third is if there is any job vacancy for any English professors, lecturers, which is the need of the hour. And fourth is, any PhD vacancy for the budding research scholars. So if you are kind enough, if you have Telegram, download it. If you don't have it, the instructions are there in the chat box, which I have just shared with you all, as well as the Gnosis and Dark Voyage Telegram group. I have shared the...
Shaikat, one little correction. When the Amitabh Ghosh books come up, we will all meet physically. Pandemic will be over. Right, we don't want to meet like that again.
Yes.
You know?
Definitely, definitely, we will try. We will try. But you know, this pandemic has given a boon in this kind of virtual interactions,
yes.
which I definitely agree that is that it has enriched a lot of academic dialogues and deliberations. Gnosis lecture series was one of such examples. You can watch those lecture series on the YouTube. The archiving is there. You can watch those. Interesting, very interesting. We even had the privilege of hosting a Harvard professor apart from tremendous intellectuals from Gujarat, we had Sachin Ketkar, we had Sanjay Mukherjee. They were so kind, and it was an absolute honor. It was so feasting, mental feasting. So thank you very much, respected participants, for sparing your valuable time and joining this particular session and making this book launch cum panel discussion a success. And I wish you all the best. Please keep safe and stay away, maintain safe distance, and please take very good care of your immunity. That's the need of the hour. Thank you so much for joining. This is Dr. Saikat Banerjee and the entire Translation Studies Approaches team bidding you all goodbye. To meet very soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.